The sun shone brightly over the open-air venue as Jack adjusted the collar of his tuxedo. The laughter and conversations of guests drifted across the neatly decorated garden, where the wedding ceremony of the year was about to take place. It was a perfect day, or at least, that's what Jack and Sarah had hoped for. "Are you nervous?" Jack asked, squeezing Sarah's hand gently as they stood at the altar, awaiting the final preparations. "A little," Sarah admitted with a soft smile. "But mostly excited. I mean, this is the beginning of the rest of our lives together." Jack grinned. "Yeah, just with a couple hundred people watching." They both chuckled, their laughter briefly cutting through the hum of anticipation in the air. The backdrop of colorful flowers and draped fabrics created a picturesque scene, but unbeknownst to the couple, the real drama was about to begin. Above the Earth's atmosphere, a massive spacecraft made its descent. With a sleek metallic hull and shimmering lights, the galactic delegation's diplomatic vessel was nearly invisible in the daylight. It had been invited as a gesture of intergalactic goodwill, a symbol of Earth's newfound partnership with the Galactic Federation. The Federation had been eager to experience human culture firsthand, and what better opportunity than a wedding? Their leaders had insisted that a small delegation attend to observe, participate, and honor the sacred rituals of human unions. Inside the ship, Zith, the tall and stately alien leader, observed the planet's surface as they prepared to land. His species, the Zonari, were an ancient and proud race, their olive-hued skin shimmering slightly in the light of their monitors. "Is everything prepared?" Zith asked, turning to his aide, Nax, who was monitoring the descent. "Yes, Commander," Nax replied, his elongated fingers tapping away at the controls. "We are ready to engage with the human customs." "Remember," Zith said gravely, "this is not just a mission of diplomacy, but one of cultural exchange. We must respect their traditions, and they, in turn, will learn from ours." The ship silently descended to the outskirts of the wedding venue, going unnoticed by the human guests until the moment the sleek, black vessel touched the ground. Inside the wedding hall, a sudden hush fell as several heads turned toward the entrance. The air seemed to thicken with tension as a group of tall, slender figures stepped through the door. Their shimmering robes flowed gracefully, and their alien features stood in stark contrast to the festive human crowd. "Who are they?" one guest whispered nervously, nudging their friend. Jack and Sarah exchanged uneasy glances. This wasn't part of the plan, but they had been briefed, vaguely, about the possibility of extraterrestrial visitors. Still, they hadn't expected it to actually happen, and certainly not on their wedding day. The wedding planner, a middle-aged woman named Louise, hurried over, her voice shaking as she greeted the newcomers. "Welcome, esteemed guests," she said with a forced smile, her eyes darting toward Jack and Sarah, silently pleading for guidance. "I trust you had a safe journey?" Zith stepped forward, his tall form looming over the small human woman. His expression, while foreign, was one of serene dignity. "We are honored to be present at this union," he said in a deep, melodic voice. "We wish to contribute to the sacred ritual in accordance with our customs." Louise's smile faltered as she glanced toward the bride and groom. "Of course," she stammered, clearly uncertain. "But we're not quite familiar with your customs." Jack leaned in toward Sarah, lowering his voice. "What do we do?" "I don't know," she whispered back, her eyes wide with uncertainty. "We didn't exactly prepare for this." Before they could come up with a plan, Zith turned toward them, extending his arms in a gesture that seemed both grand and solemn. "May we offer our blessings to the union?" he asked. Sarah, unsure of how to respond, hesitated for a moment before nodding slowly. "Of course," she said, her voice a little shaky. "We'd be honored." With that, Zith and the Zonari delegation began their own ceremonial gestures. They moved with an elegant precision, their hands weaving intricate patterns in the air. The humans in the crowd watched in awe, some whispering to one another, others simply staring. Bright lights began to shimmer from the tips of the Zonari's fingers, creating a cascade of glowing symbols that floated upward into the sky. At first, it was mesmerizing, a beautiful, if strange, addition to the ceremony. But as the symbols grew brighter, something shifted. Zitha's eyes narrowed, and his posture stiffened. He looked at Jack and Sarah with growing concern. "You misunderstand," Zith said suddenly, his voice filled with urgency. "The rings, they signify separation, not unity." Sarah blinked, confused. "Wait, what?" Zith stepped forward, his tone more insistent. In our culture, to exchange rings is to mark the end of a bond, not the beginning. You must stop before it is too late. The guests exchanged confused glances, while Jack raised his hands, trying to calm the situation. Whoa, hold on, he said, taking a step closer to the alien leader. That's not what they mean for us. The rings symbolize commitment, a promise of eternal love. Zitha's eyes flickered with uncertainty. Are you sure? He asked, clearly wrestling with the possibility that he had misunderstood the human custom. Yes, absolutely sure, Sarah confirmed, her voice steadying. For us, rings mean the opposite of what they mean for you. Zith paused for a long moment, his tall form looming over the bride and groom as he considered their words. The tension in the air was palpable, and the wedding guests remained frozen in their seats, waiting to see what would happen next. Finally, Zith nodded slowly. Very well, he said, his voice returning to its calm, diplomatic tone. We will respect your traditions. But as the Zonari delegation took their place among the guests, Jack and Sarah exchanged a glance that said it all. This was only the beginning. They had no idea what other customs the Zonari might try to introduce, or how much chaos would follow. The ceremony continued, though a palpable tension lingered in the air. The human guests, most of whom had never seen an alien up close before, couldn't help but steal glances at the Zonari delegation, whispering in hushed voices about their unexpected appearance. The extraterrestrials, for their part, stood rigid and observant, their large eyes scanning the scene with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. Jack squeezed Sarah's hand, trying to offer reassurance. It's fine, he whispered. They're just different. Sarah gave a small nod, though her eyes kept darting toward the Zonari leader, Zith, who was standing like a sentinel near the front. She could feel the weight of their watchful presence, and it was unsettling. They hadn't even made it to the vows yet, and already things felt off. As the officiant began to speak again, a new, stranger energy filled the air. The Zonari had begun subtly introducing their own customs into the human ceremony. At first, it was subtle. One of the Zonari, an aide named Nax, stepped forward and placed what looked like a glowing flower in front of the couple. It shimmered with an ethereal light, and though unusual, it seemed like a harmless gesture. The humans in the crowd murmured in appreciation, believing it to be some kind of alien gift. Thank you, Sarah said, attempting to smile as she glanced at the alien offering. But just as she thought it was over, things took a turn. Without warning, several more Zonari rose from their seats and began moving in unison. Their tall, lean bodies swayed rhythmically as they encircled Jack and Sarah. It seemed like some kind of ritual dance, one that was elegant, yet alien in every possible sense. The Zonari chanted in low, melodic tones that reverberated through the venue, sending a chill through the human guests. What's happening? Sarah whispered, her eyes wide as the aliens moved closer. Jack frowned, unsure how to respond. I think this might be part of their tradition. The Zonari, unaware of the growing discomfort among the humans, continued their dance. They reached out toward Jack and Sarah, their fingers shimmering with a strange bioluminescence. A soft humming sound filled the air, accompanied by the faint scent of something sweet and unfamiliar. It was as if the entire atmosphere had shifted, bending to the will of these otherworldly visitors. Louise, the wedding planner, was standing off to the side, her face pale as she watched the scene unfold. She had never planned for this. No one had. Should we stop them? She mouthed toward Jack, her hands trembling. Jack shook his head slightly. I think they mean well, he muttered. Let's just see where this goes. But Sarah's anxiety was growing. The Zonari's movements were becoming more intense, their chants rising in volume. The guests, once curious, now seemed visibly uncomfortable, shifting in their seats and whispering nervously. A few children, sensing the tension, began to cry softly, their parents trying to soothe them. Then, something happened that neither Jack nor Sarah could have predicted. As part of the Zonari's blessing, Zith approached them with a solemn expression. He raised his hand toward Sarah's head, and in a flash, the glowing symbols from earlier reappeared, swirling in the air around them. But this time, the symbols didn't just hover, they began to merge with Sarah's dress, causing it to glow faintly. Sarah gasped, stepping back instinctively. What are they doing? Jack reached out, pulling her close, his protective instinct kicking in. I don't know, but we need to stop this. But before he could say anything, Zith spoke in his deep, resonant voice. "Do not fear. We are sanctifying your union in accordance with the highest traditions of our people. You will be bound not only in spirit but in cosmic energy, uniting your essences across the stars." Jack's face paled. "That sounds a bit much, don't you think?" Zitha's eyes widened, clearly misunderstanding Jack's tone. "It is the greatest honor we can bestow." The human guests were growing restless, the whispers turning to murmurs of concern. Toby, Jack's best man and longtime friend, stood up abruptly. A former military officer, Toby had always been pragmatic and quick to act in stressful situations. His instincts were telling him that this ritual was going too far. "Hey!" Toby shouted, stepping forward. "We appreciate the gesture, but this isn't how things are done here. You need to stop." Zith turned slowly, his expression calm but unyielding. "You do not wish for the sacred bond?" Toby's brow furrowed, and he glanced toward Jack and Sarah, who were clearly overwhelmed. "No offense, but your customs aren't the same as ours. This is their day, not a galactic ceremony." Zith seemed to consider this, but before he could respond, the Zonari aides around him began to murmur among themselves. It was clear they were confused, perhaps even offended. Their gestures slowed, but the tension in the air only grew heavier. "We need to get them out of here," Toby whispered to Jack, who nodded silently in agreement. Jack, still holding Sarah close, tried to defuse the situation. "We're grateful for your presence and your blessings, but our traditions are different. Maybe it's best if we continue the ceremony our way." Zitha's face remained impassive, though a flicker of understanding passed through his eyes. "I see," he said quietly. "We have made a grave error." Suddenly, the symbols floating around Sarah's dress vanished, and the Zonari's chanting ceased. They stepped back, their movements slow and deliberate, as if retreating from something sacred they had accidentally defiled. Zith bowed his head slightly, and the other Zonari followed suit. "We meant no harm," Zith said solemnly. "We only wished to honor your union in the ways we know." Jack sighed in relief. "We know. It's just different here." But just as it seemed the situation was under control, another complication arose. One of the younger Zonari aides, perhaps misunderstanding the subtle tension in the air, stepped forward and activated a device on his wrist. The room was suddenly filled with a bright flash of light, and a strange, floating hologram appeared above the couple, an image of two Zonari entwined in an elaborate, shimmering embrace. The humans gasped in surprise, unsure whether to be amazed or alarmed. But to the Zonari, this was clearly the ultimate gesture of respect. Toby's jaw clenched. "That's it. We're stopping this now." As the hologram flickered above them, Jack, Sarah, and the rest of the humans realized that they were on the brink of a full-blown cultural crisis. And unless they found a way to bridge the gap between Earth and the stars, this wedding would be remembered for all the wrong reasons. The brilliant hologram of two Zonari entwined in an elaborate embrace hung in the air above Jack and Sarah, casting an otherworldly glow across the wedding venue. Guests shifted nervously in their seats, unsure whether they were witnessing a spectacular display of alien technology or an accidental cultural intrusion. The murmurs among the humans grew louder, their uncertainty palpable. Toby, Jack's best man, had had enough. Stepping forward, he motioned to the Zonari aide who had activated the hologram. "Turn it off," he said firmly, his voice brooking no argument. "Now." The young Zonari, clearly startled by the human's directness, glanced toward Zith for guidance. The alien leader, his once calm demeanor now laced with visible concern, raised a hand. "Cease the display," Zith commanded softly. The hologram flickered once, then dissolved into nothingness, leaving behind an awkward silence. Jack exhaled slowly, his grip still tight on Sarah's hand. The tension between the humans and Zonari had reached its breaking point. What had begun as a grand multicultural gesture of goodwill had swiftly devolved into confusion, misinterpretation, and an impending disaster. "Thank you," Jack said, his voice measured but strained. "We appreciate your intentions, really. But this is not how things are done in human weddings. Our traditions are important to us, just as yours are to you." Sarah, who had remained relatively quiet through the ordeal, finally found her voice. "We understand you're trying to honor us, but right now, we need to proceed with our ceremony, our way. This is a special day for us, and we'd like to get back to it." Zitha's expression softened as he processed Sarah's words. There was a long pause before he finally spoke. "We have misunderstood your customs," he said slowly, the weight of his words heavy with regret. "In our attempt to show respect, we have brought confusion instead. For this, we apologize." Jack nodded, relieved that Zith seemed to grasp the gravity of the situation. "It's okay. You didn't know. But maybe it's best if we continue the rest of the ceremony without any more surprises." Toby, still on high alert, moved closer to Jack. "We should keep things simple from here on out," he muttered. "No more intergalactic rituals." Jack gave a short nod in agreement, but before anyone could respond further, another unexpected twist unfolded. One of the Zonari aides, clearly struggling with the emotional weight of the situation, stepped forward and spoke in a trembling voice. "Commander Zith, we have failed to honor the humans properly. We must leave at once to avoid further dishonor." The words hung heavy in the air. Zith turned to the aide, his face showing a mixture of surprise and consideration. "Leave? In the midst of the union?" The aide, Nax, bowed his head, his tone steeped in anxiety. "It is the only way to repair the breach of respect. We cannot undo the disruption we have caused. We must retreat." But before Zith could reply, Sarah spoke up again, her voice surprisingly firm. "No, that's not necessary." She glanced at Jack, who gave her a small nod of encouragement, then turned back to the Zonari delegation. "You're not the only ones who made mistakes today. We should have communicated better, explained our traditions clearly before the ceremony. You didn't mean to cause any harm, and leaving now would only make things worse." Zith studied her face for a moment, clearly impressed by her composure. "You wish us to remain, despite our errors?" "Yes," Sarah said. "You were invited here to witness our union, and we want you to stay. But we need to do it our way. Let us finish the ceremony, and afterward we can share and learn about each other's customs more appropriately." Jack stepped in. "Exactly. We'll finish the ceremony, and once we've exchanged vows and rings, you can join us in celebrating. But for now, we need to keep things simple." Zith straightened, his posture once again reflecting the dignified leader he was. "Very well. We shall observe from here, in silence, as your customs dictate." The Zonari aides retreated to their seats, their glowing eyes still fixated on the couple, but now without the interference of holograms, lights, or chants. The human guests, still uneasy but visibly relieved, settled back into their chairs, grateful that the situation hadn't escalated further. The officiant, who had been standing awkwardly through the entire ordeal, cleared his throat and resumed the ceremony. "Where were we? Ah, yes, the vows." As Jack and Sarah exchanged their vows, the atmosphere began to shift back toward normalcy. The guests smiled, some wiping away tears, as the couple spoke their heartfelt promises to one another. The air was lighter now, the tension easing as the familiar rhythm of a human wedding returned. Finally, the moment came for the exchange of rings. Jack reached into his pocket, retrieving the simple silver band that had been chosen months ago. He slid it onto Sarah's finger with a smile, their hands trembling slightly from the intensity of the day. Sarah, in turn, took Jack's hand and placed his ring on his finger, the symbolic gesture completing their union. But just as the officiant prepared to declare them married, Zith unexpectedly stood up again. The guests froze, expecting another interruption, but this time the alien leader spoke softly, his voice calm and reverent. "In our culture," Zith began, "the joining of two beings in such a union is considered sacred. Though we did not understand your ways, we now see that love, no matter the form, is universal. You have our deepest respect." With that, Zith gave a formal bow, followed by the other Zonari. It was a gesture that surprised everyone, but it was clearly meant as a sign of peace and understanding. The crowd, after a brief pause, broke into applause. The officiant smiled, taking the moment in stride. "Well, I think that's about as blessed as a union can get. By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." Jack and Sarah shared a relieved, joyful kiss as the guests erupted into cheers. The tension that had hung over the wedding like a storm cloud was finally gone, replaced with laughter, clapping, and even a few tears of joy. As the celebration began in earnest, the Zonari quietly observed from the sidelines, their once rigid posture now relaxed. They had come to the wedding as strangers, almost disrupting it with their customs, but now they were honored guests, sharing in a union that transcended both culture and species. And though there would be many stories told about that day, one thing was clear. The wedding of Jack and Sarah would go down in history, not just as a human event, but as the first intergalactic wedding celebrated on Earth. I hope you had a good time. If you liked my story, do not forget to comment and subscribe to my channel. Goodbye, see you in the next story.